So I'm going to start by just explaining who our speakers are today. In addition to myself, we have Becky Alexander, who's a researcher and an architect in the Climate Solutions Studio. Monty Hillman going live, who was yesterday with the St. Paul Port Authority and next week with a different organization. I'll let him introduce himself by name. Jacob Goldman, who's on the screen today and will be here in person next week, is a chemical engineer by training, and he works with a company called Energy Tax Savers. And then Lydia Major, who is the studio leader for LA Planning at LHB, is also speaking. So a couple of just introductory thoughts before I hand it over to Becky. We met Jacob. I'm not sure if we've ever been in person. Next Thursday, I'll see Jacob in person, but we've known Jacob for well over a decade. His firm has helped us do something called the 179D Designer Tax Credit. If you don't know what that is, it's okay, but it has meant a lot of bottom line money for LHB in the form of a tax deduction, which means at our tax rate, millions of dollars of deduction at our tax rate. A law was passed, Jacob would know, 15 years ago or so, that said that if a private developer did a very energy efficient building as designed, as defined not by USGBC or the Department of Energy, but the IRS has their own definition, EPACT, that developer would get a tax deduction that comes in the form of an amortized reduction of their tax over time. Great idea. Didn't really know about it at the time. An even better idea is that a later legislator or representative said, what about those people that don't pay taxes, like cities and school districts and affordable housing developers? So they actually hold that thought, not affordable housing developers, public entities who don't pay taxes. So they created something called the 179D Designer Tax Credit, which means that deduction for doing a really energy efficient building, can you turn me down just a little bit? Goes to the design firm. And not to get in deep into the math, but it can be up to $1.80 a square foot. So if you're doing hundreds of thousands of square feet, $1.80, for 10 or 15 years, Jacob has helped us pilot that program. So we come up with the projects, we get the clients to acknowledge we did them. Jacob does the analysis for us and does the work for Lori to get it onto our taxes. It's been incredible. I think he was the first one to point out to us that the IRA created some major changes to that program, Inflation Reduction Act, not the thing you put your savings in. The amount of money per square foot is going up substantially, like to the $5 range. They've added nonprofits, so affordable housing developers, for example. But they've also attached some strings that we don't really understand yet. The rules haven't been written. Jacob's going to help us navigate that. So we had a session kind of like this a few months ago. Jacob said, I have to tell you about some other stuff. There's other stuff you need to know about the IRA, the stuff that affects your clients. I'm like, it's okay, save that for later. Or how about 5 minutes at the end of the presentation? So he did a 5-minute version of what we're going to do over an hour, and I just couldn't believe it. I mean, it just blows the doors off of everything. It's basically the concept is that, or they're used to, I'm just going to give it to you in layman's terms, then people will explain it in much deeper terms. There used to be tax credits for only a very few things, like photovoltaics. A private developer could get tax credits. They were in the 10 to 20% range, depending on the current legislation. So what Congress did for the IRA is make a whole long list that Jacob will show you of many things, including ground source heat pumps, reduced the base tax credit to a low number like 6%, but gave us a whole bunch of things that we can do or that could happen, like the location of the building, where you buy the equipment, size of the equipment that can get that tax credit, not a deduction, the credit, like you subtract it from your taxes, up to 50, 60, 70%. But that's amazing. But on top of it, they've said, even if you don't pay taxes, so all those people, the school districts, the city halls, the nonprofit developers, can get a cash back from the federal government in the amount that they would have gotten a tax break. every time I say it sounds too good to be true. So hopefully this sticks. And the advantage is we know about it a little bit ahead of time, so we can get clients to do things on their project. And the last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Becky is, for 30 years, we've been trying to get clients to do things more energy efficient, as of late, less carbon, et cetera. And I would say, it's not rocket science. In this climate, you can do ground source heat pump, make your building all electric. You can fill the roof with photovoltaics, and you can probably have just about a net zero building. It'll cost a whole bunch of money up front, and hopefully over time it would actually pay back, and it's a really good thing to do. Now, I'm pretty sure that in the coming years, if you're a school or a nonprofit developer or a nonprofit or a building owner and you don't do that, you're leaving money on the table on day one or day a year and a half after the taxes get submitted. So that's my starting introduction. I'm going to hand it over to Becky and she'll take it from there.
Thank you, Rick. So we wanted to zoom out a little bit and talk about why LHB specifically is hosting this presentation and why we've spent a lot of time sifting through what simultaneously feels like way too much information and not nearly enough information to try to understand these funding opportunities for clean energy for our clients. So as you may or may not, just a caveat for this presentation too, I'm really hoping that the LHB audience will pay attention to how your clients are represented here, and if you have any feedback that we should incorporate before the external presentation, please let me know. So as you may or may not know, LHB works on a wide range of project types. We design buildings and sites, design industrial facilities, energy systems, water systems, transportation, infrastructure. And so in any given community, we might have designed schools, office buildings, affordable housing, might have designed roads and bridges, parks and trails, might have designed energy transmission and distribution lines, a district energy system, a biomass plant, a renewable energy system. And for that community, we can also calculate their carbon footprint and what it would take to get to net zero carbon by a certain date, which is my role at LHB. Across all of these project types, we strive to be at the forefront of design for our changing world, because we know that our world is changing. In the coming decades, electricity will be the primary energy source for our buildings and our vehicles. We're not going to be powering our cars or heating our buildings with gas and oil anymore. And that electricity will be generated using clean energy sources. So you may have seen that one of the first pieces of legislation to be signed into law this session in Minnesota requires all electricity sold in the state to be carbon-free by 2040. And then all our communities, building owners, nations are also thinking about how their projects can be resilient to and adapt to changes, whether that's in temperatures or water availability, severe weather events. And then across all of these topics, we are seeing an increased commitment to and investment in social justice, making sure the voices that have been systematically excluded from these conversations in the past are helping shape the solutions, and that these solutions are in fact helping to reverse these systemic inequities rather than reinforcing them. And our clients, of course, are thinking about these issues as well and working towards them. So with MnDOT, we're working on a project looking at green pedestrian infrastructure that is also climate resilient. Our design work with SAPI is helping them with their commitment to build a bio-based circular economy in pulp and paper industry that uses every part of the tree and where processed wastes become resources. Our work with the St. Paul Port Authority at the Heights is looking to be a really next generation system. This is a redevelopment of a golf course striving to provide 1,000 jobs, 1,000 homes, and aiming to provide next generation sustainable buildings, stormwater systems, transportation networks, energy systems, urban design, all supported by meaningful community engagement. And there are many other organizations working towards these goals as well, many in this virtual or physical room. And some may be pushing the edge, some may be just getting started, some may be looking to take the next step beyond the low-hanging fruit. So what we're hoping is that we can be that resource for wherever people are at to take that next step, whatever it may be for them. So we're talking today primarily about clean energy opportunities, but that's really just one aspect of our larger vision to create regenerative communities. And if you're like many other people, when we first share this vision, you might be saying, okay, well, that sounds great, but what exactly is a regenerative community? And so at its most basic, we can say that regenerative communities have a positive impact both on people and on the planet and spark new opportunities. A slightly more academic definition is that regenerative communities enable all living systems to thrive, both now and in a dynamic future, that changing world that we're talking about, through their ability to evolve and produce positive impacts beyond their geographic boundaries. So regenerative design goes beyond sustainability. It's about harmonizing with natural surroundings. It's about evolving in response to social, economic, ecological changes. It has the ability to stimulate financial growth, rejuvenate ecosystems, improve human health and well-being, and so much more. So we're talking about regenerative design holistically, looking at its impact on many different areas. And they're all interconnected, of course. So a single strategy, like designing a high-performance building envelope, not only reduce energy use, which can impact energy costs, energy emissions, the use of finite material resources, it can also improve human comfort. It can also improve resilience when there's a power outage, enabling the passive ability to stay comfortable for longer when that type of thing happens. And regenerative design also is really thinking at the system scale. So when we're talking about ability to provide positive impacts beyond geographic boundaries, how does high performance building envelope do that? Well, by reducing the energy loads that the building needs to serve through electricity, because of course this building has a heat pump too, it is enabling that clean energy transition because it's not making so many demands of the electric grid that's making it harder for the entire economy basically to electrify. So it's playing its part towards those bigger systemic changes as well. So we don't know and we're not sure if we can get all the way to regenerative in every single one of these categories, which is where we bring our experience with technological and market opportunities and limitations and combine those with owner priorities for the project. So we're pushing as far as we can in the ways that it makes sense for each project. So for Metro Transit's North Loop Bus Garage, right around the corner from our office, this means enabling them to eventually achieve their vision of transitioning to an all-electric bus fleet. So we're meeting their existing needs today, the needs of their current fleet, while also building in the infrastructure and the capacity to expand that charging infrastructure, support it with rooftop solar, with battery storage, so that they can meet those long-term goals. Carleton College's new student housing. This project is supporting their climate action plan by pursuing passive house certification for deep carbon reductions, while also looking to improve student living experiences and provide more equitable living spaces across the college. And for Donaldson's Courtyard Landscape, this means improving not only the ecosystem services, things like native plantings, pollinator habitat, stormwater capture, but also the experience of the employees, of the visitors, of the neighbors by improving the sounds, smells, sights, navigability, and safety of the campus. And so many more. These are not unicorn projects that are trying to be Living Building Challenge and net zero energy and well certified and zero waste, whatever that means, and provide a community refuge in turbulent times. These are projects with budgets and timelines, and they have to prioritize and negotiate and compromise, which is where we're helping to use the resources that are available the greatest impact. Which is why we're so excited that these resources are expanding with the Inflation Reduction Act and with some of the market drivers that Monty will be talking about as well. We'll have the ability to collectively build our positive impact in this space. With that, I'd like to turn it over to the experts to talk about these opportunities, starting with Jacob Goldman, Vice President of Energy Tax Savers. Jacob, over to you.
Everybody ready to talk about tax?
Let's go.
Thank you for having me for this 6-hour conversation. No, it's only going to be 2. Does this work? So we're going to talk about, it's delayed. We're going to talk about 2 main things. One's the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits called ITCs, investment tax credits. And then lastly, we'll talk about how it's changed starting in 2025. So they're both tax credits, which is different than a tax deduction. These are tax credits for specific technologies. We're going to talk about those. These are all the green items that are in the Inflation Reduction Act. We're only speaking about the green ones. I'm not going to be speaking about extension of second generation biofuel incentives, zero emission nuclear power production. I'm not going to be speaking about those topics. We're just going to be focusing on the ITC. If you have questions about these other topics, don't hesitate to reach out. I might be able to assist, though I don't know that much about net zero nuclear power production. Here they are, their beauty. All these technologies are getting a tax credit. I've highlighted a couple of them, ground source heat pumps, CHP, and thermal storage, because those are specific to buildings. Some of these other technologies, you don't necessarily need a building as it relates. These items had a tax credit before. We're a 30% tax credit for solar, dropped down to a 28, dropped down to a 26. Ground source had a 10% tax credit. It's a belief that the IRA actually increased the credit. It's not actually true. All the credits have been dropped down to a 6% base credit. But what they did is they created a whole bunch of bonuses. There's something called the 5-time bonus, the domestic content bonus, energy community bonus. For some technologies, there's a low income bonus. But what you can do is stack these bonuses up. You can take your 6% credit, and for solar, for example, you can move it all the way up to a 70% credit. Ground source. I was just speaking at another conference specifically related to geothermal. I think it's a little bit of hyperbole, but they had a session called Worst to First. They were saying basically that from a first cost standpoint, ground source was the most expensive way to heat and cool your building. But now with the Inflation Reduction Act, maybe it's the cheapest way. I think it's getting it close to price-wise. Once you put in lifetime costs, it just blows the doors off. Before we get into each of those bonuses, I want to talk to you about some of the other things the IRA did for these credits. For the very first time, you don't have to be a taxpayer to get these tax credits. Any not-for-profits here? Any government? For the very first time, state and local governments directly get these credits, these same credits, all these credits right here, not-for-profits and state and local governments can get these credits. Sometimes I feel like I'm Oprah Winfrey. You know, you get a tax credit, you get a tax credit, you know. So commercial building owners, they've been able to get a tax credit for a while, and now they have these new credits. But Not-for-profits can directly get a payment for doing these same projects. State and local, and please note, I do say state and local. Any federal government here? I have nothing for you. I think what they felt is like it was moving chairs around on the Titanic. They didn't want the Treasury sending money over to military, for example, or, federal is out. But state and local, we're talking about schools, universities. On the nonprofit side, we're talking about universities as well. Religious organizations, all these entities now can get these same tax credits. It's going to come in the form of a direct payment. So it's tremendously valuable. And it's really going to blow the doors off of these type of projects because a lot more people are now eligible for them. State and local governments and not-for-profits, they did do these alternative energy incentives before. But what they did is they had to get a company that was going to do a tax equity partnership and do a PPA, a power purchase agreement, and sell them energy. And you knew that that entity was making the most amount of the money. Now that payment is going to be able to go directly to the not-for-profit, directly to those state and local governments. Tremendously powerful. Now, because they got this incentive, they did put some extra caveats and haircuts on the credit. So one of the haircuts is if you use tax-exempt bonds. So if you use tax-exempt bonds, you can still get the credit, but there might be a haircut up to 15%. They'll take 15%. But what that means, just so we're clear, it doesn't mean a 40% credit, for example, drops down to 25%. It means a 40% credit drops by 6% down to 34%. So it's not a drop of total, it's a percentage drop of 15%. There's another haircut depending on when you finish your project. Will define or how you did your project or how big the project is, whether there might be another haircut, which would be a 10% haircut. But it's unbelievable that these entities now can directly benefit from a tax incentive, even though they don't pay any taxes. Okay. Next thing, and this is Oprah moment, you get a credit, you get a credit. You are a tax-paying entity, but you didn't owe taxes, you couldn't really benefit from this. So here's where I'm thinking real estate investment trusts. Real estate investment trusts, if you're familiar with those entities, they don't pay taxes. They're now going to be able to transfer their credit. This is only available for commercial entities, tax-paying entities traditionally. This is not available for not-for-profits. This is not available for state and local. But commercial entities will now have an opportunity to sell their credits. And we were thinking at one point that we'd create a platform to allow people to sell their credits, but what we found out is there's a lot of competitors out there. So these 5 entities are the ones that we were able to find. There might be 6, 7, 8 other entities where you're going to be able to go on these platforms, post your credit, and sell it. Now, Georgia has a film tax credit that is sellable. Georgia's film tax credit typically sells for like 70 cents, 80 cents, 90 cents on the dollar. So you're not going to get the full value of the credit. But you will get a portion of the credit. And so real estate investment trusts are now going to be able to put solar on their roofs. They're now going to be able to do ground source, and they're going to be able to sell their tax credits and, take in that income and reduce the first cost for these projects. Let's get into the bonuses. When I talk about these bonuses, I kind of feel like I'm in an infomercial. But wait, there's more. There's another bonus. There's another bonus. There's a whole bunch of bonus, but the most important bonus is the 5-time bonus. So, as I mentioned before, the credit is 6%. To get it up to the 30% level, you have to qualify for the 5-time bonus. The first way you qualify for the 5-time bonus is by being a small project. And put that in quotes because a 1 megawatt solar project is not that small. It's a pretty big solar project. So if your solar project is smaller than 1 megawatt, 5-time bonus. 5 times 6 turns you into a 30% credit. Anybody know how many megawatts a typical ground source heat pump project is? It's not typically measured in megawatts. You measure ground source heat pump in tons. So we did some math. We think it's correct. We think that means 284 tons. So as long as your ground source heat pump project is under 284 tons, 5-time bonus. You get the 5-time bonus. I'm going to skip one and then go down to the bottom one here. Anybody have projects that are ongoing that started already? Those projects, if they started before January 29th, they're grandfathered in. They get the 5-time bonus automatically. The projects that started construction before January 29th, grandfathered in 5-time bonus. Projects under 1 megawatt, 5-time bonus. If you're over 1 megawatt and you didn't start your project yet, then you have to meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. So your project, the installation of that project has to meet prevailing wage and apprenticeship. If it's bigger than 1 megawatt and it started after January 29th, you have to meet prevailing wage and apprentice. And everybody catches the first part of it where I say prevailing wage and they say, oh, sometimes we do prevailing wage, not a big problem. What I point you to is it's an and, prevailing wage and apprenticeship. So you do have to do both prevailing wage and apprenticeship. So let's talk about the prevailing wage. So how do you know what the prevailing wage is? So it went twice. Go to this website, www.sam.gov. You type in the location of your project and the type of project, and it will list all the prevailing wages for all the different trades for your project. You have to be at or exceed those prevailing wages in order to qualify. Now, if your trade doesn't show up, for some reason your area doesn't show that trade, you have to get a wage determination. The way you get a wage determination is by sending an email to this email address. You have to send it all this information, and you'll get a wage determination for that trade. Then you'll have to pay that amount or more to meet the prevailing wage. But you're going to want to also have a collected data to be able to prove it. You need to be able to prove that you paid everybody prevailing wage. And so, anybody heard of certified payroll? Certified payroll is a great way to prove that you meet this prevailing wage. What we're not clear on is whether certified payroll is going to show whether you met the apprenticeship requirements. So certified payroll will definitely show you if you meet prevailing wage, but you're going to need specific information related to apprentices in order to know if you meet that requirement as well. The requirement for apprentices, once again, you're grandfathered in. So before 129, there's no apprenticeship requirement. But after that date, in 2023, 12.5% of your labor has to come from apprentices.
Question in the chat from a couple of slides ago. Can this grant in lieu of credit go to a nonprofit responsible developer of a for-profit owned project? Are all these credits?
So tell them to send me an email. We're going to have to get the real details because it goes to the economic owner of the energy efficient equipment. You need to, in that chain that you just mentioned, I would have to determine who economically owns that equipment. And the economic owner of that equipment would determine who gets the credit. The 12.5% total labor hours in 2023, 15% starting in 2024. Now, that you can show with your certified payroll. The part that is interesting is you have to meet on a daily basis, repeat this, on a daily basis, you have to meet the apprenticeship to journey worker ratio. That apprenticeship to journey worker ratio is defined by the registered apprenticeship program where you're getting your apprentices from. So you have to get your apprentices from a registered apprenticeship program, and they will define what the apprenticeship to journey worker ratio is, which you have to meet on a daily basis. If you don't meet it, you don't get the bonus. If you're one of those large projects. If you're under a megawatt, you still get it. If you're over a megawatt and you haven't started your project yet, you have to meet both prevailing wage and apprenticeship. If you go to your registered apprenticeship program and they can't provide you with an apprentice, you meet the good faith effort exception. So if you meet your good faith effort exception, then you don't need to have apprentices on hand, but you have to go to a registered apprenticeship program to get your apprentices. Wait, there's more. Not only do you get the blender, you get the Ginsu knives as well. So domestic content bonus. Remember, it's a 6% credit. This bonus is actually a 2% bonus. But if you meet the 5-time bonus, it turns into a 10% bonus. So your 30% credit goes up to 40%. Now, why is this exciting? I put those ground source, CHP, thermal storage. Where is most ground source, CHP, and thermal storage manufactured? Manufactured here in the United States. So if you're doing a ground source project, a thermal storage project, or a CHP project, oftentimes you can meet this domestic content bonus, which any day now we're going to get more guidance from IRS on how to specifically meet it. But you can, with US technology, this US manufacturing, those three technologies, you can meet this bonus. And so lots of ground source is getting a 40% off coupon, minimum, a 40% off coupon, that ground source. So when they said worst to first, you're getting close when you can take a 40% off on the project. So tremendous opportunity for ground source, for thermal storage, for CHP, and that's because of the domestic content bonus. But wait, there's more. There's more. So we have the energy community bonus. Basically what's happening here, what's really happening here is Joe Manchin wanted an extra bonus for his West Virginia area. Joe Manchin, obviously West Virginia, coal mines that have closed. So there's a rule here that if a coal mine closed since 2000, that area is considered an energy community, and you get this bonus. Once again, it's a 2% bonus, but if you meet the 5-time bonus, it turns into a 10% bonus. A coal plant closes in the last since 2010, you also get this bonus. And there's another bonus based on the amount of jobs in gas, coal, and oil in your area. If 0.17% of your area's employment comes from those groups, and you're higher than average unemployment, you also get the bonus. Now, easiest way to look at this is a map. So what I'll tell you is the blue areas are that 0.17% of employment. You can't trust the blue areas yet. By the way, this is, everybody could just quickly write down this website. Or you'll get it afterwards. But that website brings you to this page. And right now you can't trust the blue because it doesn't have the overlay with the unemployment yet, but you can trust the orange and the tan. But the orange and the tan is the census tract and adjoining census tract where a coal-fired plant was closed. So if you do a project in one of these orange areas, you get the bonus. Not if you're doing ground source, you just moved your 40% off coupon to a 50% off coupon. Half off sale on your ground source if you do a project in one of these orange areas. And maybe, by the way, the unemployment overlay is going to happen late in May. So when they add that unemployment overlay, then you can trust this. And if it still stays blue, then that blue area will be also eligible for the energy community bonus. Wait, there's more. Last bonus is the low income bonus. This is only available for solar and wind. Is a little different than the other ones. The other ones, you just get these. If you do the project, you get the credit. This one you have to apply for. So it's an application process. The application window is going to open up in the third quarter or late third quarter. It depends on which category you're going to apply for. There's a given amount of megawatts that they're going to distribute. And so you have to get your allocation before you start your project. And so you'll apply for it. There'll be a 60-day window to apply. You get your allocation. These two categories is 10%. These two categories is 20%. And so you'll apply for those. And if you get the credit, it'll dramatically cut down on the cost of those projects. And these two categories right here, if you get the 5-time bonus, you get the domestic bonus, you get the energy community bonus, and you get one of these, that's why solar and wind can get to a 70% credit. You can get all the way up to a 70% off if you happen to be in one of these locations. Now, I'm going to skip this slide for now. Unfortunately, we have a lot of low income. This is category 1. So if you do your project in category 1, low income area, and you can get a bonus based off of application. You have to apply and get it allocated, and then you can get the bonus if you're in one of these areas. This is the entire list. Once again, you see how it multiplies all the way up to 50% or 70%, depending on the technology that you're doing. That was Section 48. Section 48 besides for ground source, pretty much sunsets for projects that start in 2024. Projects that start in 2025, besides ground source has all the way up to starting by 1/1/2035. Besides ground source, every other technology sunsets for projects started in 2024. And then this other incentive called 48E comes in. And 48E is called the Clean Electricity ITC. The other one was just called the ITC. This is called Clean Electricity ITC. We're doing some guesswork here. So anything in green, we're guessing, we're pretty sure, actually we know, that these will be included in 48E. So basically the same incentives exist for the green ones starting in 2025. But anything in red, we're pretty confident there's no more credits for them. So if you're thinking about doing CHP, for example, you need to get your CHP started in 2024. Otherwise, there's just not going to be any more credits for it. Then the yellow ones, they're not generators of electricity, so we're not exactly sure how that at all is going to work. And so hopefully we're going to get some guidance and they'll tell us if those are in or those are out of 48E. Last slide. Can I do one last slide? Okay. I really like ground source. I think it's a great technology. It's a great way to save energy. And now that the costs are way down, I think it's first cost standpoint, it's close. And from a lifetime cost standpoint, it just blows the doors off of other technologies. What qualifies for the credit? What costs actually qualify for the credit? So for ground source, the costs that actually qualify for the credit really is the bore field and the heat pump. So the bore field, the heat pump, the design, the installation of the bore field and the heat pump, those costs qualify for that 30 or 40 or 50% credit. But there's a tax interpretation off of a very similar type of technology. And here's the code, if everybody could just write that down real quickly. That technology will allow, if the ground is the energy that's flowing through your ductwork, through your diffusers, through your pipes, through your air handler, if the energy is mainly coming from the ground, that equipment also gets included. If you do a conventional project, you're going to have ductwork, you're going to have air handlers, you're going to have diffusers, no credit. If you do ground source and it's the sole energy use, all that equipment now becomes credit eligible. Things that you would have had to spend anyways on your conventional technology, now you're going to get a credit of that 30 or 40 or 50%. So tremendously powerful. And also, ground source got this extra 10 years. So you can start your project in 2034 and you're still going to qualify for that ground source. I have some slides here on some other stuff, but I think we're constrained. So don't hesitate to reach out to me. There's a YouTube video that you can see for a longer presentation. My email address. And could I answer questions now? Or?
Keep going.
Okay.
We'll have
T, here you go.
Thank you, Jacob. Morning, everyone. If I seem a little schizophrenic at any point today or not sure of who I am or where I'm at, it's because I recently left the Port Authority after 18 years working on sustainable development. And 2 days ago, I started a new role with Sustainable Investment Group as the Vice President of Environmental Resiliency, Compliance, and Investment. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I know it says PACE here, but really we're going to talk about some macroeconomic things that are going on and talk more generally about financing decarbonization. So you've heard about ESG. You should all know this and have this baked into your brain by now. It's doing some pretty incredible things in our economy. Why is it doing some incredible things in our economy? Because their investor class is paying attention to it, and we'll get more into that. These are some headlines, and there's just a couple of slides. I've got an Apple News channel I follow called ESG Investing. And if you look at some of the publications here, Bloomberg, Forbes, Fortune, CNBC, Inc., Smart Company, etc., this is 2 weeks of headlines. Maybe a couple months ago, I grabbed these screenshots. 2 weeks of headlines of what the financial industry is writing about ESG. I really love food business news. Food business news weighed in. And actually, it's a quote from Accenture CEO Julie Sweet that I really appreciated here, because you'll hear a lot of, there is some ESG pushback in the marketplace now. CEO of Accenture says, sustainability matters to our employees from a recruiting standpoint, matters to our clients, it's part of our regulatory landscape, it matters to consumers. That's not changing because of what politicians want to call it. I don't think it's going away. These are some of the components that make up ESG. Obviously, we could spend hours on each of these circles. I should point out the environmental part of ESG is getting the most attention due to climate disclosure regulations, and it's also much more quantifiable than some of the other components of ESG. Why does ESG matter to commercial real estate market drivers? Tenants, your clients and leaseholders, they have goals around carbon and climate that need to be met. Developers, the folks that are leaning into this, are seeing with all of these tools across the spectrum that there is a green value creation chain that they can access if they're doing it right. Regulators, the SEC, Securities Exchange Commission is expected, I believe, yet in May to announce their climate disclosure regulations for all publicly traded companies. What that means as to scope 3 emissions, which would be including leased commercial real estate, is yet to be determined. But what we've heard is that the carve out where you don't have to report on scope 3, you don't get a free pass on scope 3 if your institution has made a public goal. You've made a public statement that investors may have relied on, you're going to have to report scope 3. So even if you're not a publicly traded company, the you know what is going to flow downhill pretty quickly. And institutional investors, because of the national and international regulation, the climate disclosure regulations are already happening across the world, just not in the US yet. Value creation impacts. So we do know from a few studies that have come out recently, 10 and 20-year analytical studies of LEED certified buildings, we are seeing green premiums. The folks who are really ahead of the game on this, I'm thinking of Nuveen and Tishman Speyer. They're modeling their whole portfolios against the Boston regulations, against Title 24 in California, against New York's new state law, to see if they are going to wind up with stranded assets, meaning assets they can't transact without a major infusion and a major retrofit because some local or national ordinance or code has made those buildings unattractive in the marketplace. And as good as a green premium is, you don't want a brown discount. I think it was Rick Collins from Ryan Companies many years ago at a real estate event said, you don't want to be the last developer in town building brown buildings. This is Cushman Wakefield's Green is Good study showing some of those green premiums, both in terms of sale price, rents and cap rates. This is a real case study. I know we've got some friends from United Properties in the room. In my role at the Port Authority, we did a joint venture with UP. We built a LEED Silver industrial building on spec, multi-tenant spec building. We have a gamble. And we didn't hit pro forma rents. The market was not there on the rent side, but when we decided to exit that building after it was fully leased, we went to capital markets and got a 50 basis point bump, meaning 50 basis points better valuation in the capital market sale because it was a green asset. One of many factors, I'm sure, but it certainly was one of the leading factors. So the ERV calculation for us real estate folks is how we do back of the envelope valuation. That cap rate is kind of a measure of risk in some sense. Nail salon in a tired old strip mall, maybe like a 12 cap. A Class A office building on Main and Main is maybe not an office building today. Industrial building is maybe a 5 cap, 5.5 cap. But it was real value created in capital markets. Commercial PACE, C-PACE, you'll hear it called. I believe there's about 30 states in the nation that offer PACE financing. The Port Authority is the statewide administrator for PACE in Minnesota. So it's involved in about all the different PACE transactions that happen. One of the most successful programs in the country, both by project count as well as by dollars. I think Andrea's here. I think we're over $300 million in projects financed. Generally, the energy savings are intended and modeled to be higher than the debt service payments. It's available for retrofits, rehabs, and new construction, and can be retroactive in Minnesota for up to 12 months. These are all the kinds of things you can do with it. Real magic here is replacing equity. Equity is your most expensive form of capital. And if you can replace equity at 20% cost with about under 5.5% cost for PACE financing, you're ahead of the game. Minnesota with PACE is the state of 20s. You can get up to a 20-year term on your loan. You can be financed 100% financing on up to 20% of the appraised or assessed property value. And to qualify, your project, your component of your building just has to show a less than 20-year simple payback from the energy savings. All kinds of client benefits. And zooming back out. This is something I've been thinking about a lot. I've had some time on my hands, as you could imagine, to do some mind mapping. And well, there is this great alignment. I started off talking about ESG, and probably 6 months ago, that was my entire focus, was ESG is changing the world. And when I really had some time to think about it, I realized it's not just ESG. It's all of these components that are in alignment that are driving our marketplace and our communities to decarbonization. Earth Day, the Pew Research folks came out with a new study about climate and carbon and climate change, and the numbers were off the chart. The one that popped out to me was like 71% across the political spectrum. Folks think we need to decarbonize our built environment. A lot of disagreement on what we will do or not do to get there, but we know we need to get there. The climate science has been more clear than ever. We've got environmental and racial social justice issues pushing us to decarbonize our built environment in an equitable fashion. Technology, I'll mention this afternoon, a few of us, Jacob included, are speaking at the Getting to Zero conference, which is here in Minneapolis this year. Was there last year or 2 years ago and met a consultant. Her job was working on developing blockchain technology for kilowatt hours. So every kilowatt hour, you will be able to identify the provenance of. Did it come from a green source? Did it come from a carbon intense source? And it's the type of technology that will allow vehicle to grid two-way charging. So we can sell the energy in our batteries in the millions of cars that will be driving around with these electric batteries. You will one day be able to sell those back to the grid. Her statement in that presentation was, maybe that's your side hustle 3 years from now, selling $50 of energy back to the grid. ESG investing, we talked about the palpable risk, climate risk, carbon transition risk, energy security. There's a war in Europe, you know, I mean, energy security is a real thing. All of these things are pushing alignment, the great alignment. The great motivator, Rick, when he saw the great alignment, said that's great, but you realize that's just the intention, right? But what's really going to get it to the table? And as a project person, as a developer at the Port Authority, you know, 1.9 to 4.3%. Oh, I think I broke it. Let me. Here we go. At least on this screen. It's not switching up here. Okay. So this one, let's go to this one. These are the things I've talked about, the fact that I think these are really, there's some new disciplines. There's some new connection of existing disciplines that deal with valuation, you know, green appraisal strategies, green leases. There are some new fundamental shifts in how we conduct real estate transactions that are going to have to happen. And that's going to require some different people talking to each other. Brokers understanding what the impacts of green design are at the front end and what it means to their tenants. The stuff I'm most excited about, and I'll be working on at Sustainable Investment Group, net zero pro formas, net zero portfolio studies, and really helping connect these dots of green value creation from the IRA through through these projects from start to finish. But it does really start with design. It starts at concept, and you really need to pull these concepts. The one right before that, maybe. Thank you. So cash, the great motivator. One of these things says 1.9 to 4.3% increased NOI. In that valuation calculation I showed you, NOI drives value. Higher rates of return. In whatever study you look at, there seems to be about a 50 to 100 basis point spread available from these green value creation strategies. If you can make those investments and not burn up in a first cost, that spread, you're ahead of the game. One of the things over on the right there, the cash flow drivers in commercial real estate, the valuation drivers, thank you. At the bottom here, one of the things that's exciting, as Jacob mentioned, is the transferability of the investment tax credit. And the last one, other than the last allocation that Jacob mentioned for the low-income community credit, there's no cap on the investment tax credit. Most folks in this room are probably familiar with LIHTC, low-income housing tax credits, new market tax credits. Tom, I know you're applying for LIHTC. It's a competition. New markets is a brutally competitive process to get allocation. There's no cap. The federal government has said, we're going to keep doing this ITC thing and not limit it, which is kind of an amazing thing. So, didn't break it. So this is all the stuff that I feel like we need to be doing as a marketplace. A lot of this stuff, some of the folks at Sustainable Investment Group already do ESG training, ESG reporting. I'm going to be helping with the Net Zero Services, Inflation Reduction Act, and value creation component. And maybe after more than a couple of days on the job, I'll explain that a little better to you. But we're kind of making it up as we go along here. So thank you.
Thanks, Monty. I'm gonna, you go ahead, Lydia, come on up. And I'm just gonna kind of recap a couple of things. I was taking lots of notes. So I know Jacob talked a lot about the apprenticeship and the wages, but just keep in mind that exception. Someone asked David Williams what a 1 gigawatt project was, and he said really big, which I think I could have done too. So most of your projects probably aren't going to need that. The other thing, I just want to make sure it didn't sneak by. We're often talking about, when we're comparing a ground source system with a traditional gas boiler system, the delta in cost and how we manage that. This is the credit on the total cost of the ground source heat pump, including designers. So we have to do some math. Let's see. The other thing was that sort of free pass. If you have a project that started construction before January 1st and becomes occupied after January 1st, none of the restrictions apply. You shoot right up the chart. So those were kind of some high points. Oh, and then also the pace. I was with a for-profit developer who I don't think is in the room when we were explaining all this, and he said, wait a minute, I can finance a bunch of that stuff over 20 years and get a lot of it paid for me within the first year or two. Absolutely, that's true. So a couple of other things we're not going to spend a lot of time on today. We know, again, just about enough to be dangerous about what the state's doing, but I will tell you this, hundreds of millions of dollars from the state towards this program in the form of grants and matching funds. Could be pushing $1 billion, we'll know in a couple of months. Let's see, the other thing, and this will be the transition to Lydia, every time I watch something or attend one of these, I learn something new. So I saw a USGBC session recently that talked a lot about grants in the federal program as well. So there's a ton of money available, in particular, local units of government, and Lydia is going to talk about an example of a project that we did.
Thanks, Rick. I'm Lydia Major. I lead the Landscape Architecture and Planning Group at LHB. And I watched the same webinar that Rick did. And while I'm really excited that people are getting Ginsu knives with their blenders, Jacob, I really glommed onto the part about community planning and what it takes to queue us up to get grants that help an entire community pull together a climate action plan that enables them to take advantage of some of the other funding that will be available for infrastructure improvements in the future. So I'm going to have even less available information right now because a lot of this is happening real time. And we know that it needs to come through the state, and the Met Council is queuing us up, and other folks are getting Minnesota communities, tribal, local, regional communities ready to go on these planning efforts. But what we do know is that a lot of them are going to require or fund, and then that requires additional information for climate action planning, just something that is near and dear to my heart. And I'm really excited to show you an example of what one of those plans could look like. I'm going to feature a plan that we did with the City of Hopkins, and I just want to shout out Peggy Sue Imahibin is our City of Hopkins partner on this project. Such a great leader for the City of Hopkins in terms of making this project happen, and then bringing this project forward in investments that they're actually doing to help people build infrastructure that helps with heat vulnerability. We created a story map for this project, which is something that some of you may be familiar with, but rather than having a document that like sits on the shelf for the next 20 years and everybody occasionally remembers is there, but mostly forgets about, we have a live website that documents what the project process was like, shows the research that we did, shows the community engagement that we did, and then makes recommendations. This is a live website that the community can refer to and update over time. And I super want to shout out as well Jess Vetrano from LHB, who created this particular website, because I think it's really exciting. I'm not going to go through every part of this because it's available and you'll get a link to it. And I hope you will dig into it yourselves and take a look at it. But I'm going to just say it shows our research about extreme heat overall, about the particular effects of heat in Hopkins. And I wanted to feature a part of this map, which is some live cool things that it does. So the most important thing about heat island effect in a community, in my mind, is the overlap between vulnerable households. So these may be low income areas, areas with high percentages of seniors, just those communities that we know can't handle. Sorry, it's very hard to manage the computer and the microphone. At the same time. So here's a map of vulnerable communities along Excelsior and Blake, which was our study area in Hopkins. You can see why the Minnesota PCA funded this project, large areas of vulnerable populations. It overlays with a very interesting map, which shows tree cover on the right and impervious surfaces as I peel off to the left. And what you can see is those vulnerable populations are overlapping very closely with the worst that our public infrastructure can provide in terms of the island effect. So NPCA very wisely thought that this was a great corridor to make this kind of study happen. We went through a process developing recommendations that involved more research, community engagement, super involvement from the community on this. We had great turnout for some events, including a bike giveaway and everything. We really had an unusual amount of engagement on this project. And then we developed some strategies, and I have to crouch down to do this. So here's maybe a view of what the corridor kind of looks like right now. Those gray lack of tree canopy maps that I was showing earlier, here they are in real life. Well, our interpretation of real life. And then here, I peel over to show the different strategies in a graphic format that we're recommending. In addition to the actual summary here, which is maybe more formatted for residents, there's always clicks to get to more information. Everyone likes a good matrix. Here's one that explores these strategies in more depth, shows what kind of impact we expect them to have and what kind of resources might be needed to make them happen. This is more for our decision makers, but also gives folks a little background into how much research goes into a simple looking recommendation like this. And then these recommendations aren't just about what you might see in the built environment, although we continue that to show what buildings improvements might look like, simple things like shade at transit stations, et cetera. Show one of the most important aspects, which is social cohesion. We know that people who do suffer during heat events often don't have the connections to family members and the society to make safe decisions in those situations. And this is strategies to help with that. And finally, and this may be where some of the infrastructure investments happen eventually, is ensuring access to that reliable and clean backup power to make things happen. So I've tried to make this very quick, but I hope everyone will take a look at this as an example of the kind of planning that we may expect to see funding for in the future. I do want to hover over the acknowledgements page on this for a minute, because lots of people help make this happen, and it's an extremely valuable asset. And then there's some additional information at the bottom that may be useful to folks as well. So I think with that, I'm handing it back over to Rick to wrap up.
You go to whatever. Thanks, Lydia. So we're going to do Q&A, but before you give a round of applause, we lost it. 10:01. I asked the group to try and be done at 10 o'clock. Amazing. So round of applause for the speakers. I think someone mentioned it. A few of us are going over to an international conference at the Marriott City Center, not the convention center, called Getting to Zero. And Becky, Monty, and Jacob are all speaking. So you kind of have the all-star cast here. So we're going to do question and answers for a little bit here. What I'm going to do is start here. You just raise your hand or stand up and ask a question, and I'll repeat it. Then we'll go to Duluth and see if someone can manage the technology there, or you can unmute them and they can ask any questions they have. And then we'll either let people unmute online or you can read off of the chat. So, questions for anyone?
Question?
Yes.
The best way to kind of go about assessing if you have a project that could use some of these without spending weeks and weeks trying to figure out, like, what's kind of the big picture approach to
So the question is, what's the best way to assess? I'm going to give my shot at it. And from a tax standpoint, I'd like you to weigh in on it as well. So I think what we need next, and I think we'll have to work on this together as clients and design firms, is we've tried this for projects that were just about over the finish line. Not a good time to do that, right? So like at the beginning of a project, okay, we're going to do a natural gas boiler, and we're going to do a really tight building, and we're going to use the grid. But maybe we would consider something like air-to-air heat pumps or even ground source, and maybe we could do some photovoltaics. At that concept phase, do some side-by-side analytics of the value, check the maps, look at are you going to be at 6%, 30%, 50%? Because I think in that early stage, with some, kind of high level cost estimating, you'd be able to decide by the time you got out of concept or schematic design whether that path is going to make economic sense.
The only thing I would add is we were in a time machine 2 years from now. These incentives are going to be known. Everybody is going to be able to put them into projects, be more settled. Right this second, we're waiting for some guidance. There's a little bit of uncertainty, things like that. And so you just got to do the best you can. Reach out to a company such as ours, LHB, to get more information. But 2 years from now, if we're in that time machine, everybody's going to be able to incorporate these incentives into their projects.
The tool I'm working on, and as it's evolving in real time, for at least, I think, the private development folks in the room, after-tax discounted cash flow valuation modeling, which once it's built with the right inputs from the tax side, could provide some really early go, no go, is this return going to get through investment committee, those kinds of questions. After-tax part is the thing that I think is going to give some of our colleagues in commercial real estate a little bit of heartburn, because it can get so complicated and so convoluted, hence Jacob. But I think it's really the only way to compare apples to apples on a return basis. How do you factor all this in? Otherwise, the tax treatments are all kind of behind the scenes and don't roll up to some return that an investment committee is looking at. And that's, I think, where we have to get with this stuff.
And I would just say, I think Jacob will probably be on Teams with us a lot. If you're not using LHB, you can certainly reach out to him, but reach out to either one of us. And then for people doing projects that could take advantage of the very last, the 50 to 70% on solar that you have to apply for in the third quarter, I'd get out ahead of those things because that's the one that'll be competitive. Okay, other questions here? Sir.
With all the excitement and enthusiasm around the incentives, any thoughts about what that's going to do to prices, the ability of practitioners to keep up with demand? I think you might have answered that a little bit by what you were just saying about kind of getting ahead of it. But is anybody making any predictions to the ability to keep up with perhaps increased demand for solar panels or Darcy wells or what have you?
Yeah, so the question is, will these incentives drive demand so much that the critical path becomes the equipment's not available or the design service is not available? And unless anybody has a better answer, I'll go first. I would say it's going to roll out so slowly that, it is amazing to me. I have a conversation with somebody, not going to name names, but people who are responsible for large scale development of building structure in our state, governments, nonprofits who haven't even heard of this yet. So getting out ahead of it, I think some of us will have the opportunity to be at the front end. I think it's going to take time, and that I truly believe that the infrastructure, I know the designers can keep up. I'm thinking the ground source manufacturers and the photovoltaics people will be able to keep up too. Right? Question over here.
Can you talk about what IRA tax credits are available for a merchant builder who's developing and selling very quickly?
So the question will be for Jacob about IRA tax credits for merchant builders building very quickly.
So the credit exists to the economic owner of the equipment. So if you're owning that equipment for 6 years, that's kind of the sweet spot. That first owner owns it. But if you're flipping really fast, it gets problematic because you have to pay the credit back, actually. And so it's really not designed for the flipper. So if you're building it for someone, they're going to be a permanent owner, then they take the credit. But if you're building it on spec yourself and then selling it, it gets complicated because you have to sometimes pay credits back if you don't go the full 6 years.
You can't sell the credit.
You could sell the credit. The rules for selling hasn't come out. We don't know exactly how they're going to treat the flip. What happens when the flip happens if you sold your credit? It's going to get complicated, I think. And more than likely, it's going to follow the same rules that have been around for a long time. And there's going to be some sort of reversal. It's going to be very painful for the person that bought that credit because they're going to have to do something as well. So that's a wait and see. Where Lily Batchelder is Assistant Secretary to the Treasury. She had a press release. She was saying, here's when guidance is coming out. Guidance you're talking about theoretically will come out in the next 6 weeks.
It's kind of along the lines of what I was talking about some of these new approaches to how we transact real estate. I've been talking for months now about a concept called the benevolent landlord, where under a gross lease transaction, now you've got the ability to quantify and potentially share, or at least trade, negotiate these tax benefits that may or may not be available to you, your buyer, or your tenant, and become part of that lease negotiation, become part of that sale negotiation. Which I think historically church and state. My tax situation is mine, and I don't want to confuse it with yours. There could be some real benefits to thinking about transactionally different ways of conducting business.
Mark, did you have a question?
The speakers could move to your left.
He's doing lots of hand motions. And that one more here, and then I'll shift to Duluth. Oh, yes, go ahead, Frank.
Plus storage, where's that play? What are the credits for that? Because that's a really important part of it.
So battery storage and thermal storage, all credit eligible, all the same credits that we had on the list. I didn't emphasize it, but it was one of the line items on that big list that you saw.
Okay, is there a question in Duluth? And if there is, could you just unmute and ask it? Or, yeah.
Yeah, hi. First, I just want to say thank you all for this meeting. This has been helpful. I've been diving in and studying this, and every time I hear it again, it helps again. So thank you. On the alternative energy credit bonus, you mentioned the 5 times bonus to get from 6% to 30%. Is it all 3 of those criteria, or just pick one of the 3 criteria? The smaller than 1 megawatt meet prevailing wage projects before construction. There was 3 criteria. Do you have to meet all 3 or just one of the 3?
It's just one of the 3. And by the way, if you could keep it sunny up there, I'm coming up Thursday.
Great. We'll try.
Yeah, so I think that answered your question. Yeah, any one of those exceptions gets you the 30%.
Perfect.
Thanks. Other questions in Duluth?
Yeah, I had one. I see Robert Grimstead there in the foreground and a few of our other transit clients who receive funding from the FTA through Metropolitan Council. Does that have any implication? You mentioned federal projects, Jacob. I'm looking at you mostly. Does that constitute a federal project where they're getting funding from the FTA, or is it strictly who the ultimate owner of the project is?
So federal funding is the entity that's receiving the federal funding can still get the tax credit, but more than likely, if it's an entity like a state or local business or not for profit, and there's going to be one of those haircuts would likely apply. Also, depending on how much of the project is funded by the federal government.
Any other questions in Duluth?
I have one more, but I don't want to hide it.
Go ahead. We'll take one more from Duluth and then we'll go to the chat.
So the 179D credit for commercial buildings and public entities are not eligible for that. What's the mechanism? Like, who do we ask to help us figure that out? Because we have projects I think will be eligible for there, but are we still waiting for guidance? Everyone keeps telling me wait for the guidance, but what's the mechanism to deploy that 179D for public entities?
So it won't be available for public entities, just for private entities. The 179D designer tax credit will continue to be available for designers of public and nonprofit buildings, and that's actually been expanded kind of a whole nother session maybe. Does that answer your question? So if you have questions about the 179D on the commercial side, I would say follow up with Jacob after.
I thought it was eligible for public buildings, but that's just for design?
Just for designers. Yeah. Okay, how about on the chat? Does anybody want to just unmute? Can they unmute themselves and ask a question? Let's someone ask a question. I want to see if this works. We have like 40 people out there. Someone unmute and just ask a question. Turn your camera on too if you ask a question. All right. Any other questions here? I'll come back here. Otherwise, we'll wrap up and the speakers will hang around. Maybe I'll take advantage of the time to see if there's one more question. I'll just do a very brief thing on the 179D designer tax credit. So as an architecture and engineering firm, that's how we started working with Jacob 10 or 15 years ago. When we design a building for a city or a school district or a county, because they're not eligible for the 179D tax credit, we can get that tax credit. It requires one thing, and this is a little bit of a commercial. It requires our client to sign a one-page piece of paper called an acknowledgement form that says, yes, in fact, you did design that building. And in fact, it was built and it opened on this date. It's very helpful to us, which I think in turn is very helpful to you. That program has been supersized a couple of different ways. The potential dollar amounts per square foot went up with some strings attached, very much like the tax credits with apprenticeship and prevailing wage potentially. But it also now is available for us to use for nonprofit clients and tribal entities. So we'll be talking to our clients about that starting on January 1st of 2023. Any other questions here?
One quick thing, Rick. Can you hear me? So
yes,
I think one of the comments was it might be too late on some of these projects that are in the hopper. We've done 2 studies with 2 different school districts. And because our mechanical group has been designing boiler systems with low temp water, it doesn't change the radiator design. It doesn't change the coil size and the air handling units. So we have found a way for projects that have either been bid, actually both of them have been bid, to look at the geothermal. The one was a $2 million credit, actual cash back on $10 million in mechanical and a $40 million project. And the other one looks like it'll probably be about $1.25 million net cash back, based on a $20 million IAQ remodel project. So these aren't small dollars; they are large amounts, and it's just a matter of getting the construction manager or contractor on board and helping the owner understand it. So I would say it's never too late.
Thanks, Kevin. So I'd say that's a very compelling case as opposed to what I said earlier, at least not closing the door on the possibility of a project that's even to the bidding phase. And of course, hopefully everybody's doing something in the way of being PV ready. And so that could literally happen after the fact. I think Jacob maybe told me of an example of a project that was where the building was complete, but the photovoltaics actually went into service after January 1st, and we're able to take advantage of a very large tax credit with no strings attached. So I think to Kevin's point, earlier better, but later still okay. Yes, David, and then I'll get mine.
That Jacob added on the PV that was really important is that the increased structure you need can be covered by the credit, if I remember correctly. So that's an important thing with especially commercial construction because things are so tight.
Just so everyone heard that, David indicated that it could include potentially the structural additional cost as well for PV.
So one of the things that I keep wondering about is, and Jacob, you can tell me if I should stop wondering about this, but I feel like one of the barriers or opportunities is this apprenticeship program. Most of us in this room have nothing to do with how that could work, how the contractors manage it or not. And I'm wondering, is that something that owners and then via their architects and specifications are going to have to require upfront? Or do you see the construction industry, sort of separating themselves, the ones that really get on top of this and can sort of market the fact that we've got this under control and you're going to automatically get, a 50% bonus because we're on top of it?
So you're definitely going to want to get the rules for this to the extent they exist. You're going to reference IRS notices and things like. You want to get those rules in any contracts you're going to have with your contractors. You're going to want to get it in your specifications if contracts haven't been created yet. You're going to want to get these rules in there. There's lots of projects in different parts of the. This is a union incentive basically. They wanted to increase the use of unions. So there are some states that there's lots of union activity and there's some states that there's not. We don't think that in the states where there's not a lot of union activity that this is going to dramatically increase the union activity. My guess is they're just going to, unfortunately, for those really big projects that are over 1 megawatt, they're going to lose out. But you're going to want to get it in your contracts because you're going to want them to follow those rules. By the way, I mentioned Lily Batchelder, the Assistant Secretary to the Treasury. In her list, she listed more information on this topic is coming in. I put it in the 8 weeks to 10 week range. So we're going to get more information on that. And you're going to want to get that language to your specifications and into your contracts to guarantee that this stuff occurs so you can get these higher credits. But really, it's about those big projects. Most buildings can't put a megawatt on their roof. That's a giant roof that can put a megawatt of energy on their roof for solar, for example. 284 tons, you get into the 200,000, you even get over 100,000 square foot. You could be over 284 tons of heating and cooling. But if you're under 100,000 square feet, more than likely, you're not going to be pushing that 284 tons on a ground source project, for example. So I think there's going to be a lot of projects that don't need the prevailing wage and apprenticeship. It's really going to be about these big projects. And if those big projects want the incentive, you're going to have to get it in their contract.
Yeah, I would just say once again, let us together help you figure that out. Scout it out early, decide whether you're even close to that threshold, work with the whatever the right approach is, like to Mike's point, if we need to put it in the specifications or talk to the contractors, and we'll figure this out together. Okay.
What is the critical date for the rule changes on these credits? Start of construction, placed in service?
going to try and see if it corrects me. I'm going to say placed in service.
No. You're correct. Placed in service defines when you get the credit. You can only get the credit after placed in service. Start of construction is important for some other things, specifically related to that January 29th. If you started construction before January 29th, then you're grandfathered into the 5-time bonus. Another thing is, let's say you're doing a CHP project. You're going to want to have your start of construction happen before December 31st, 2024, because if you start at January 1, 2025, more than likely there's not going to be a tax credit for CHP.
And we've been using substantial completion date as our placed in service equal. Any other questions? All right. Thank you. One more round of applause for our speakers. They'll be sticking around for a little bit. Have a donut on your way out and some coffee. Thank you very much for coming. And thanks to Maria and Alethea and Mark and Gail and everybody else who helped out. Take care.